State Treasurer Ken Miller says Oklahoma's overall tax receipts rose slightly in May compared to a year ago. Steady growth, especially in the oil field, pushed May collections 2% higher than the same month last year. Fluctuating corporate tax collections have been dragging down state revenues, but even they are up in May. I talked to Oklahoma Watch reporter Warren Veith about Oklahoma's volatile revenue stream. Warren, why is Oklahoma's revenue collection volatile?
Well, Dick, we have several sources of revenue that tend to bounce up and down somewhat unpredictably. The gross production tax, for example, goes up and down based on what happens to oil and gas prices. But it turns out that the real stinker in the state budget forecasting process is the corporate income tax. The corporate income tax has swung wildly within a range over the last few years, making it very difficult for the state to accurately predict how much money will be available for appropriation.
And why does that happen?
It's difficult to determine with precision. In some cases, corporations are just doing what corporations have always done. They're taking advantage of every tax break, every accounting practice they can to reduce their taxable income. And they have the ability to report almost zero taxable income sometimes in years when they're reporting record profits to their shareholders. It's all legal. We've created these exemptions and tax breaks that enable to do them, but it messes up the state's ability to accurately plan for its budget.
Overall, tax collections are up and have been trending upward for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, we're in the 4th or 5th year of an economic recovery and expansion, and as you say, total tax collections are up somewhat. The amount of money available for appropriation is not necessarily up, but that's because not everything goes into that pot. But for example, just with this corporate income tax, 16 months ago when they sat down to forecast how much money would be available for agencies to spend from that tax source for this year, they said $481 million. Well, it turns out we've collected only 240-some million so far this year. We'll be lucky to get through the year with 300 million. That's a $180 million forecasting error in that one tax source.
How can it be so far off?
Because of the unpredictability of these corporate accounting practices and tax credits. In some cases, they're responding to changes that Congress makes in the tax laws. But State Auditor Gary Jones looked at this about a month ago and said that in some industries, companies are becoming much more aggressive in pursuing tax avoidance strategies. For example, with oil and gas companies, they've learned that they can spin off their oil and gas pipeline operations into what's called master limited partnerships and permanently reduce the amount of corporate taxes that have to be paid on those ventures.
You say tax avoidance strategies are entering in here. Does the state then need to get ahead of the game and change the forecasting methods?
It does. There's not much the state can do to change the federal tax laws and the accounting practices. That's pretty much beyond the state's control. What the state could do is to take into account a little better the unreliability of this one tax source and to try to allow a greater margin of error in its future forecasting. The State Treasurer, Ken Miller, and the Finance Secretary, Preston Dorflinger, met 2 days ago to talk about this very thing. They're expected to make recommendations to the governor later this month.
And would that then go into effect for the next fiscal year?
If they're adopted, presumably.
All right. So changes could be in the works.
Could be.
To make Oklahoma's revenue collections not quite so volatile.
Possibly.
All right.
We'll
Warren
see.
Veith from Oklahoma Watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.